We're back learning lessons with Preston Manning from his new book, Faith, Leadership, and Public Life. And Preston, you've taught us so well that democracy is about managing conflicting interests that people have. And you believe the Bible has a lot to teach us about that. How so?
Well, I think the central part of Jesus' message was reconciliation of conflicting interests in two dimensions. One was, he believed, and I believe, that people are alienated from God by things in their life. So there needs to be reconciliation in this dimension. And then he taught the need for reconciliation in the horizontal dimension of conflicts among people. And his approach to reconciliation is fundamentally different than any others that I've seen, where rather than trying to solve it through courts and laws and things like that, God's approach appeared to be you create a mediator who embodies both sides of the conflict, part God, part man. He was called the Son of God, Son of Man. The mediator immerses himself in the community that he's trying to reconcile. He's not some distant judge that can't have a connection with anybody because there's a conflict of interest. He internalizes a conflict of interest. And then he communicates with both sides. He prays to God, he teaches people, he communicates both ways. And then he sacrifices his own life and interests. He pays the price of getting people together, or getting together with God, rather than requiring that the offending party pay the price, which is what the court system does. Like, it's a unique approach to reconciling conflicting interests, and I think it's applicable to the reconciliation of conflicting interests in the political arena and labor management relations, troubles companies get into, and at least we should study his approach to reconciliation as fundamentally important.
And how much goes private, how much goes public as you study the life of Jesus and try to apply it to your conflicts? When do you know, I take this public about I'm doing this out of my belief in Jesus?
Well, I think you have to play that by ear. I was in the management consulting business. I worked out a functional flow diagram of the reconciliation process according to Christian theology with boxes and arrows using systems analysis. But I stripped out all the religious language of it. God became the initiator, the process. Jesus became the mediator. The Holy Spirit became the facilitator. The opposition, or the devil, became the opposition. I stripped out all the religious language, but the process was basically the Jesus' approach to reconciliation. And then I used to try to apply it in the business area and in some of the conflicts that some of our clients, particularly in the energy sector, used to get into. So in that case, if I'd said this is a religious Christian way of doing it, they'd have thrown you out of the room. But when I just said, I've got this way of looking at conflict resolution, let's see if it would work. So in that case, I kept the religious or the Christian part of it separate. I think on other occasions, there's a time to show people that this approach to reconciliation is an old one, and it's a profound one. It's a lot more profound than a lot of what's taught in the management schools. There's a time to give credit for it, but be careful when and where you do that.
What is your opinion of how polarized politics has become? When you speak this way, of seeing this kind of reconciliation of our conflicting interests, we have families that can't even talk politics because they're so polarized about their opinions.
Well, in one sense, there's a place for polarization because it tends to clarify what the alternative positions are. But then if it just stays there, or if somebody just feeds the polarization, it just gets worse and ends up in an irreconcilable conflict. I think if people do have different positions, but then reconciliation becomes the object, and usually that, though, has to come from someone outside. The mediator is not, he understands both sides of the conflict, but he can't be part of it. And this also gets into the political arena. One of the differences between Alberta and British Columbia, for example, my father who was premier in Alberta at the time, W.A.C. Bennett was the premier in BC. Bennett, they call him Wacky Bennett, believed in polarization because that's the character of British Columbia politics. You get into your different camps, and then the key to winning an election was if you can get the mushy bunch in the middle to fall on your side of the pole rather than the other ones, that's how you win. My father's view was that was maybe not the best way to go about it, but I think there's a place for polarization, but then ultimately there has to be reconciliation. And if that doesn't occur, then polarization is just completely negative. And in the United States, the Americans tend to polarize a lot more than Canadians, but more, and they always used to then try to find the common ground. In more recent years, that has seemed to evaporate. So polarization by itself is just a bad thing.
All right, we're going to keep learning about faith, leadership, and public life, how we apply our Christian principles into that world that means so much to us. Preston Manning on Lessons About Leadership.